Chapter 176, The Vigil of the War of Amora, 2. Returning to where I had last seen Kevin after I spotted him casually leaning against a wall, I called out for him as I waved at him. "Yo, I'm back." "Oh, you're back, huh?" Spotting me, just as Kevin was about to greet me, stopping abruptly, his eyes paused on a tall hooded figure that stood behind me. "Hey, Ren, who is he?" Glancing at the hooded figure standing behind me, I waved it off as I casually said. "Him? You've already met him before." "Who?" Turning around, and glancing at the hooded figure, I spoke in Latvian. "It's okay to take off your hood, he's with me." The reason I was able to communicate with him in Latvian was thanks to Angelica's telepathic ability, which allowed me to understand and speak the language. "KHRR, yes." Nodding his head, the hooded figure slowly pulled down his hood, revealing the features of a white orc that had a large scar that traveled past half of his face, making him look especially intimidating. Opening his eyes wide, Kevin exclaimed. "What? Silig?" Nodding my head, I confirmed.
"Yeah,
Silig in the flesh." Alternating his head between Silig and I, Kevin had many things he wanted to say. However, he refrained from voicing them out as he knew it wouldn't do them any good at the moment. Especially since Ren pretty much recruited the one guy he fucked over. Just what had the world become? Unaware of Kevin's thought, with a smirk on my face I said. "Surprised, right?"
"Yeah."
If I said I wasn't surprised, that would have been a lie. I mean, he had just recruited Silig, a Legion commander and someone whose rank was far above his. How could he not be surprised? Seeing Kevin's reaction, nodding my head repeatedly, I glanced at Silig, who was standing behind me. Well, things just happened and I think Silig would be a great addition to our team. Moreover, he was just rotting in jail, felt that it was a waste of his talent. With an awkward smile on his face, Kevin nodded his head.
"Yeah."
"If you say so." He was indeed someone that could go toe-to-toe with a count-rank demon. It would indeed be a waste for someone of his strength to rot in jail. But that wasn't the problem, as Kevin really couldn't wrap his head around the fact that Ren had just recruited the one person he screwed over. If he later found out the truth of the matter, Kevin wouldn't even know how to help Ren. Sigh. Sighing out loud, Kevin glanced at Ren and asked. "How did you convince him?" "It didn't take me much, I just proposed to him a couple of." As Kevin and I were conversing, Silig remained motionless. He was currently staring at the army of orcs in the distance with a solemn expression. Because Kevin and I were not speaking in Latvian, he couldn't understand a thing, but he didn't seem to care as his eyes were currently fixed on the army of orcs in the distance. More specifically, the orc leading them. Omagolg. The current orc chief, and an existence that stood at the top of the food chain of Amora. Staring at Omagolg in the distance, Silig's eyes burned with hatred. For having his loyalty thrown away in the trash because of something he did not commit, Silig never felt this much hatred in his life before. Not even for the demons who had taken over their land. At the moment, to Silig, as long as he killed Omagolg, he did not care about what he would do next. Even if he had to be someone's slave for life, Silig did not care. He had to get his revenge. Noticing Silig's odd behavior and thinking of something, Kevin glanced at me and asked. "How were you able to free him from the prison? Wasn't he supposed to be imprisoned? How could Ren suddenly sneak into the prison without getting caught?" From what Kevin remembered, the prison was supposed to be heavily guarded. Yet Ren was able to sneak in that easily and take one of their most wanted prisoners out? Kevin was beyond confused at the moment. Understanding Kevin's thoughts, I shook my head and said. "It honestly wasn't that hard, I just went in and brought him out."
"Yeah."
That was pretty much all I did. Infiltrating the prison really wasn't that much of a challenge for me. I just casually walked in and freed Silic. No special plan or scheme was needed to accomplish this goal. With pretty much every single orc in Good Kodra leaving to attack the demons, they naturally were lax in defending the prison. In fact, there was practically no one guarding it. Still, although no one was guarding the place, Silic was still trapped there as he was bound by the thick chains specifically made to restrain him. It was evident that although he wasn't guarded, he couldn't get out and was left to rot there. Omagulg wanted him to die of starvation. Naturally, this was for what had happened with the food supply. Although Silic wasn't responsible for the fiasco, someone had to take the blame, and Silic was the orc that Omagulg decided to pin the blame on. The way that Omagulg refused to even use him for the war against the demons went to show on how much resentment he had against him. I guess he just wanted to find someone to blame, and Silic was the perfect target as he was the one in charge of the food supply. From the way I saw things, there was no way Omagulg didn't know that Silic was on break when the explosion happened, so I figured he wanted to vent his anger against someone for his son's death, wrong as it may be. Thinking along those lines, I couldn't help but shake my head. Even the strongest leaders had their weaknesses. But honestly, although I had not predicted for this scenario to happen, I couldn't be happier with this development. In fact, just the thought of it made me involuntarily smile. Being the scum that I was, I took advantage of this situation I created myself and took the opportunity to make Silic join my side. The 43rd power law, work on the hearts and minds of others. By seducing him with the exact thing that he wanted, freedom and revenge, I've managed to recruit him to my side. Once I fully accomplish what I promised him, without a doubt I'll have Silic's heart conquered and he will truly start following me then. An orc whose strength was around a rank. Now that would truly be an achievement worth celebrating. In fact, as soon as Silic agreed to my terms, multiple plans and scenarios started formulating inside of my mind for the past few days. And finally, after 10 days of thinking, I finally knew of how he could be of use to me. As I thought about it, a small laugh escaped from my lips. Noticing my laugh, looking at me weirdly, Kevin asked, "What are you laughing at?" Glancing at Kevin, I casually waved my hand. "No, nothing, I was just laughing at how easily I was able to infiltrate the prison and free Silic." "That's true, but shouldn't they have at least left someone behind?" Shaking my head, I pointed towards the orcs in the distance as they slowly left Good Kodra.
Nah.
Just take a look at them, do you think they even care about returning at this point? Turning his head towards the orcs in the distance, Kevin fell into deep thought before nodding his head. I guess you're right. From the way that the orcs were behaving, it did indeed seem like they weren't planning on coming back. I guess the orcs were really enraged this time. Staring at the orcs leaving Good Kodra for a couple more minutes, turning around, I knew it was about time to move out. All right, we should get going as well.
Yeah.
Next destination, Seton. There were 3 main cities in Amora, Seton, Budcod, and Zrost. Each of the cities was guarded by a Marquis-ranked demon, and given the size of Amora, each of the cities was quite far from one another. About a week's worth of travel between each city. And this was at speeds only Marquis-ranked demons could achieve. Had it been a regular demon, the time could stretch to a couple of weeks or even reach a month's time. We're here. Halting my steps and staring towards the distance where a large city stood, I knew that our journey to Amora was reaching its climax. So this is Seton?
Yeah.
Standing next to me, Kevin couldn't help but softly exclaim. This is a lot more than I expected. Glancing at Kevin, I didn't comment as I too felt the same way. The city before us was something that I could have only dreamt of seeing in movies and illustrations back in my past life. It left that much of an impression on me. Built along the banks of a river that rested between 2 tall volcanoes where lava quietly dripped down towards the ground, was the city Seton. With towering buildings and uniquely shaped infrastructures that were built in black and pointed towards the sky with its sharp tips, Seton looked extremely intimidating. The sky around Seton was dyed in red and black as demonic energy shrouded the whole perimeter of the city. Because of the demonic energy lingering in the air, the environment resembled the demon world more and more as the pale blue sky of Amora was nowhere in sight. Staring the sky from afar, looking at the city in the distance, turning his head in my direction, Kevin asked, "Why is the city so important for the orcs?" Although Kevin had a map of Amora, he wasn't fully aware of the circumstances around Amora as the system only gave him a brief overview of the world. Therefore, he was genuinely curious about the city before him. The reason he asked Ren was because he seemed to know a lot, and although Kevin didn't know how, he didn't really bother asking. It was none of his business. Glancing at Kevin for a second, I responded, "Because of the soil." "The soil?"
Yeah.
"The volcanic soil, to be more precise." The reason why Seton was the most important city for the orcs was because of the fertile soil that came from the active volcanoes that resided next to Seton. With the volcanic soil containing special minerals, the herbs and crops grown on the soil were densely packed with nutrients that were especially useful for orcs that used aura, as it enabled their bodies to become stronger. With the fertile land that came from the volcano, the orcs were able to grow an endless amount of food to feed their whole populations, including the other planets on which they resided in. And it was precisely because of the food grown on Seton that the orcs were able to increase their strength so rapidly and hence turn into such a prosperous race. If not for the nutrient-rich food, the orcs would have never been able to develop and become as strong as they were now. Sadly, as the demons invaded Amora too fast and too unexpectedly, the orcs, which at the time were fighting amongst each other, found themselves completely helpless and divided. As a result of this, the orcs had suffered a devastating defeat, and thus why they had to settle far away from their land in good Kodrer. Had they been prepared and united, the situation would have never have happened. Turning his head around, glancing towards the distance, Kevin asked, "How long do you think it will take for them to catch up?" Tilting my head in confusion, I asked, "For who?" "The orc army." I think a couple more days with the pace they are currently moving at." Because the goal was Seton, I had asked Kevin to lead me there, and thus why we separated from them. By now the demons were fully aware of the fact that the orcs were waging war on them, as for the past few days, I've witnessed the orcs pummeling through the demons that were in their way. Wherever they went, devastation was left behind. And because the demons were caught off guard, many small cities which had been taken over by them were destroyed and seized by the orcs. No one was spared. However, this did not last for long, as not long after, the demons were made aware of the fact that the orcs had launched an all-out war against them, and thus also prepared a counterattack. Both sides already started fighting, but the war was still in its early phases, as the strongest warriors from both sides had still not made a move. And thus, staring at Seton in the distance, I knew that a long battle that would last years had just started. One that would leave nothing but devastation and lead to countless deaths from both sides. I knew that from this day forth the flames of war had finally enveloped Amora. Chapter 177, Seton 1. Well, that was easier than I thought. Stepping foot into Seton, Kevin glanced around as he responded,
Yeah.
This was a bit too easy for my taste as well. Casually looking around the insides of the city, I nodded my head and added, "Well, it is only natural considering the layout of the city. I guess." Entering the city of Seton wasn't hard, with how massive the city was and the fact that there were no outer walls encircling the place. Kevin, Silig, and I were able to enter the city without any difficulties. Still, although we had entered the city fairly easily, that didn't mean that we could let our guards down. The city was filled with demons, and a single wrong step could lead to our demise. So just because we had entered didn't mean anything. This was probably the easiest task. The hard part would naturally come in due time. Looking left and right of the city as he admired the buildings before him, Kevin said. I guess the fact that orcs aren't very good at sneaking into places also played a part as to why the city is not that heavily guarded. Hearing Kevin point, I couldn't help but agree more.
Yeah.
That's true. Simultaneously glancing towards our right, both Kevin's and I's eyes paused on Silig's massive frame. After traveling with him all the way to Seton, we pretty much understood why Seton wasn't that secured. There was no way someone as big as him could enter the city without being noticed. Especially since orcs tended to be extremely hot-blooded. Just an insult and they would fly into a fit of rage. If not for the fact that I kept enticing Silig with the prospect of revenge, we would have long been discovered. Inwardly sighing and staring at the city before me, I decided to find a secluded spot to rest. We had been traveling non-stop for the past few days and so we needed to find a place to get proper rest as things were soon going to become difficult. Especially considering what we had to do next. Here, this should do for now. After a while, arriving before a rather inconspicuous-looking house that seemed to be desolate, checking to make sure that no one was present, I urged both Kevin and Silig to enter. This was after I was able to confirm that the place was indeed abandoned. The interior of the house was nothing special as dust and spiderwebs covered the place. Torn and worn-out carpets appeared on the floor and aside from a large wooden table and a few chairs in the middle of the room, there was nothing else inside of the house. It was evident that this was an old house that an orc used to prior to when the demons invaded. Staring at Silig and Kevin who had both sat down on the wooden chairs of the room, I made my way towards the entrance of the house. You guys wait here, I've got something to do, I'll see you in around an hour. Turning around and looking at me, Kevin looked at me in confusion. What are you doing? I have to do something. Although I wanted to rest, I sadly still had something to do. It was about time I started the next part of my plan. Glancing at Silig who sat opposite to Kevin, I looked back at Kevin and said. Although you might not need the help, Sigil will be here to protect you. With his strength, you won't really have to worry about demons coming in here and exposing your whereabouts. So just in case a demon comes and finds you, just ask Silig to take him out. Oh, and make sure he does this quietly, don't let yourselves be exposed as that would ruin pretty much everything. Listening to me and glancing at Silig who kept quiet the whole time, Kevin nodded his head as he once again asked. Sure, but what are you going to do? Staring at Kevin, I answered vaguely. MHH, you'll see soon enough. I kept the answer vague on purpose. With my next plan once again involving Angelica, I sure as heck couldn't let the both of them be aware of her existence. Kevin because he had once fought her and explaining things to him would become troublesome. Silig. Well, he definitely couldn't be allowed to be made aware of Angelica's existence. If he found out that a demon was with us, he might put the pieces together and realize that the whole situation arose because of what Kevin and I did. And simply put, that could not happen. If that happened, everything that I had worked hard for would come crashing down in a matter of seconds. As my thoughts paused there, staring at Kevin and Silig, I waved at them. All right, I'm leaving. Turning around, I opened the door and left the building. It was time to start the next part of my plan. Angelica, come out. After moving far from where Kevin and Silig were, with my left hand twitching I called out for Angelica. Materializing before me, Angelica glanced around and looked towards the sky as she said. I've missed this familiar scent. Okay. Hearing Angelica's comment I was a bit weirded out, but I somewhat understood how she felt. With this place being filled with demonic energy, Angelica was like a fish in the water. Anyway, Angelica, please release your aura. Turning around and glancing at me, Angelica raised her delicate brow as she asked. Release my aura? Nodding my head I curtly replied.
Yeah.
This was the last task that Angelica had to complete. Release her aura. With Angelica having left a distinct trace of her demonic energy on Zornarafa's body, the orc chief could naturally sense her if she released it. The reason I wanted her to do this was because I wanted to lure out the strongest demon away from Seton. With Omagulg directly targeting Seton due to him being able to somewhat sense Angelica's distinct demonic energy trace, he would naturally move to Seton and as a result, cause the stronger demons in Seton to move out and defend the city. Although Omagulg hated all of the demons, he would naturally want to target his son's killer first. This was a crucial step to my plan, and that was because, staring into the distance where a large, eerie and intimidating black castle stood, I knew that entering that place was the key to achieving my goals. Getting a closer look at the castle, I couldn't help but mumble to myself. Oh wow, talk about an eerie castle. The castle before me was quite eerie and intimidating. Especially due to its design, as 12 narrow round towers formed a protective barrier all around the castle, which were connected by high, narrow walls made of black stone. At the side of the castle were dull windows thinly scattered around the walls in fairly symmetrical patterns, along with huge banners and flags that were fluttering atop the castle. At the front of the castle was an enormous black gate connected by thick and heavy metal chains with various intimidating-looking statues appearing next to it, further adding to the eerie feeling that shrouded the castle. The Castle of Azeroth. That was the name of the place, and it was also where Marquis Azeroth resided. One of the 3 Marquis-ranked demons residing in Amora. Fortunately, because Seton was the closest city to Good Kodrer, with Angelica releasing her aura here, it was only natural that the orcs would come here first. In fact, because of how far the 2 other cities, Budkod and Zrozd, were, reinforcement wouldn't come anytime soon, meaning that when the orc chief came, Marquis Azeroth would have no choice but to leave the demon castle he resided in. And the exact moment Marquis Azeroth left his castle, was the moment that I knew I had to move. This was an extremely crucial step, as that was where the items I wanted were located. With the demons plundering the whole of Amora, most of their treasures and items were naturally kept somewhere. And one of those places was naturally in Seton, or more specifically in the Castle of Azeroth, where one of the strongest existents on the planet resided. Although the demons had no use for most of the items there, that didn't mean that they were useless, as demons could entice other orcs to join them using those items. Just like villains. And if I didn't remember incorrectly, most of the items I was looking for were locked inside the basement of the building. Inside of a treasury, including the cure to the Mindbreaker curse. Sigh. Sighing to myself and staring at the castle in the distance, I've never felt so close yet so far from my goal. If only things weren't so complicated. As I was busy studying the castle in the distance, recalling something, I turned towards Angelica as I asked. Hey, Angelica, I want to ask, when demons form a pact with someone, do both parties have to be present at the same time, or can they make a pact from far away? Staring at me for a couple of seconds, Angelica shook her head. No, as long as we both sign the contract that binds our souls, we don't have to be present. You just need to sign the contract and everything would be sorted. I see. Interesting. Finding things that I as the author didn't know was something really interesting. As I've never brushed on the topic of demon contracts back in my novel, I had no idea that both parties didn't need to be present when signing a contract. This came as a pleasant surprise as an idea suddenly lit up inside of my mind. Squinting her eyes and looking at me apprehensively, Angelica said, "Why are you asking?" Glancing at Angelica, who was looking at me with caution, I shook my head and casually said, "It's nothing." Not believing my word one bit, Angelica became even warier. "Human, you better not be playing any games with me. Relax, you know me, if I have to ask you for something, I'll naturally give you the appropriate rewards for it. I am not a stingy man." As I spoke, I tried to suppress my beating heart that came as a result of my excitement. A really interesting idea came into my mind. And the more I thought about it, the more I couldn't help but find the edges of my lips curve upwards. If the plan I came up with worked, then a very interesting situation would come as a result. And when I meant interesting, I meant truly interesting. Chapter 178, Seton, 2. The ground shook as an ocean of bulky figures wearing large metallic armors walked through the vast plains of Amora. As the troops marched forwards, they left nothing but devastation in their wake as they crushed anything that obstructed their paths. With each step they took, the ground beneath them shook. Be it demons or beasts, they would attack and show no mercy. Blood spilled everywhere as the green plains of Amora were dyed by a sea of blood. Karam! 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 Chanting their war cry, the orcs excitedly plundered the cities they crossed and took whatever they could find. Food, clothing, gems, coins, anything that could be taken was taken. Nothing was spared. KHRRR. Standing behind the army, overlooking the orcs from the distance, was an imposing and enormous figure whose frame was much larger than that of the orcs in the distance. The figure's muscles were extremely defined as they bulged out of his body. His forearm alone was the size of a human head. The orc's skin was a shade of dark green and on his body were red tattoos that traced from his face all the way to his abdomen. KHHR, KHRR. Thin adulation of energy emanated from the orc's body every time he took a breath as a stifling atmosphere shrouded the area he was in. With his eyes closed, the orc had his arms crossed and stood still without moving a single muscle. He acted as though nobody was around him. As the green orc stood motionlessly with his eyes closed, behind him, 5 orcs stood with their backs straight, not daring to make a single move nor utter a single word, afraid of angering the orc before them. Although each of the 5 orcs that stood with their backs straight all had rather powerful energies, theirs was a far cry from the power of the orc that was before them, as just a single glance from him could cause their blood to freeze. Omgolung. That was the name of the figure before them, and he was their chief. Sensing something, Omgolung suddenly opened his eyes as he stared towards the distance. Has something happened, chief? Noticing Omgolung's strange behavior, slowly walking towards his direction was a thin elder-looking orc that supported his body with the help of a wooden staff. Glancing at the elder-looking orc before him for a second and staring toward the distance, Omagulg's deep and raspy voice resounded across the space. Umra, I sense it. Solemnly looking at Omgolung, the elder-looking orc named Umra asked. Sense what? After a short pause, an extremely frightening pressure exuded from Omgolung's body as he slowly spat. I sense the demonic presence that is responsible for my child's death. Suddenly, like a tremendous gust of wind, everything around Omgolung was swept away as the orcs standing behind him had a hard time stopping themselves from being swept away as well. It was as though a tremendous tornado was upon them. KHHH, Chief. Fortunately, the pressure did not last for long as Omgolung was able to quickly regain his composure. Sighing in relief, opening his eyes slightly, Umra asked. Pardon my impudence, where is the location of the target? Closing his eyes once again and taking a second to get a better feel of where the energy was coming from, after a minute, Omgolung responded as he stared towards a certain direction. Seton, the demon that killed my son, is in Seton. Taken aback, the elder-looking orc asked cautiously. Seton? Where Marquis Azeroth resides? Yes. At the mention of Azeroth's name, Omgolung showed no reaction as he had already expected such a scenario from the beginning. Since the demon was living in his city, it meant that he was the one who had issued the orders, no? Thinking along those lines, Omgolung felt his rage reach a whole new level as the bloodlust that he had kept hidden within his body slowly started to reveal itself as a suffocating pressure engulfed the area he was in. If only it wasn't for that darned Silig. Recalling Silig, Omgolung felt his blood rush. Failure upon failure. Everything went downhill from his first failure in the expedition, and the same thing happened with the food supplies. Had he done his job properly, none of this would have happened. Silig. Slowly muttering his name underneath his breath, a thick bloodlust emanated from Omgolong's body. There was a specific reason as to why he had imprisoned Silig. He wanted to set an example for the others that stood behind him. That this was the price of failure. Still, although he had done this, Omgolong wasn't planning on keeping Silig chained up for long. They were at war after all. He just wanted to teach him a lesson. He couldn't let such a powerful figure rot in jail like that. The only reason why he was leaving him in jail was to dilute his inflated ego. He had to show him his place. Only when the war reached its climax would he release him and let him join the fight. The reason why he wanted to do this was because he wanted to appear magnanimous towards the others. Not only would it solidify his position even more, but it would also boost the morale of the troops, as Silig was a force to be reckoned with. Chief. Noticing Omgolong's odd behavior and feeling the dense bloodlust leaking from his body, Umra tried to redirect the topic in hopes of distracting him. Should we redirect the troops to go there? I mean Seton. Briefly glancing at Umra, nodding his head, Omgolong's deep voice echoed across the space. Yes, forget about all of the minor cities. We are directly marching to Seton. Understood. Taking a large horn from one of his servants, Umra placed the horn in his mouth and blew it. As soon as Umra blew on the horn, a shockwave swept the surroundings as every orc in the distance stopped whatever they were doing and glanced at Umra in the distance. Kiam, Kiam. Seeing that he had gotten everyone's attention, clearing his throat and putting the horn back, glancing at everyone, Umra shouted. Finish with what you're doing. Under the orders of Chief Omgolong, we are going to Seton. Hearing the command, starting at each other for a couple of seconds, the orcs proceeded to shout their war cry, completely unaware of the fact that most will die as a result of this decision. Karam! 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 Stop! A day after deciding to go to Seton, abruptly staring into the distance, Omgolong suddenly halted his steps as glared towards a certain area in the sky. Show yourself. Kakaka, it seems you've gotten better of the years, Omgolong. Chucking, appearing from out of nowhere and standing in the air with two empty eyes stood a black humanoid figure who indifferently looked towards the orcs beneath him. Behind him, thousands upon thousands of humanoid creatures similarly appeared out of thin air. Every single one of them had a grin plastered on their face. It's been a while since we last met, Omgolong. As the black creature stood in the air, a constant shadowy veil dangled around the creature's torso, resembling a lot like the heads of a few other orcs. Noticing this detail, the hatred Omgolong had towards Azeroth intensified as a powerful pressure bore down on everything within the vicinity. Noticing Omgolong's unstable state of mind, the elder-looking orc next to him shouted. Calm down, Chief, this is likely a trap to rile you up. The orc heads was definitely a trap set up by Azeroth in order to rile up Omgolong so that he could increase his advantage. Realizing this, Omgolong quickly calmed down as he nodded Umra in acknowledgement. A pity. As the humanoid creature floated in the air, its blood-red eyes did not shift away from Omgolong even once. A bony tail swept behind the creature as coarse hairs cover it sporadically. Behind him, two gigantic wings extend themselves fully. Spiky bones and blistering membranes stretched upward, preventing anyone from seeing anything other than this being. Still, as the creature stared at Omgolong from below, a horrible grimace appeared on its face. You still haven't answered my question, Omgolong. Why are you suddenly attacking us demons? Glaring at Azeroth even more fiercely, Omgolong's deep voice resounded across the land. Do not play dumb, you know exactly why I'm here? Shaking his head, Azeroth teased. But I don't. Was it because you missed me after last time? KHRRR, as you wish. Staring at Azeroth standing in the air, with each breath Omgolong took, a similar sound to that of a muffled thunder escaped his nose as he glared at Azeroth in the air. Since Azeroth wanted to play games, he was going to show him a fun game. A game involving his death. Picking up a large metallic hammer decorated in fine patterns which also had a single blue orb attached in the middle, raising the hammer in the sky as he pointed towards Azeroth in the distance, Omgolung shouted. Then, since you won't admit your wrongdoings, I shall personally kill you. Thereafter, Omgolung swung the hammer down towards the ground. And as if the world split apart, the ground beneath Omgolung cracked apart as a loud explosion resounded across the space. Shortly after, sharp-like projectiles that came as a result of the fragmented rocks that had just been smashed by Omgolung's hammer attack shot towards Azeroth, who stood in the air. Taken aback by the sudden attack, smiling widely, Azeroth chuckled. Kukuku, it seems like you really want to die. Spreading his arms widely, a translucent black shield appeared before Azeroth as he blocked most of the projectiles coming his way. After blocking most of the projectiles, simultaneously glaring at each other, both leaders pointed towards each other as they shouted. Attack! Attack! Following their commands, the orcs and demons moved, and not long after pained screams and blood started spilling everywhere. The Battle of Amora had just begun. Moments before Omgolung met Azeroth, Seton City. All right, I think the coast is clear. Noticing that Azeroth had just left the castle, turning my attention towards Kevin and Silig, I urged them to follow me. Yes. Swiftly moving around the streets of Seton, we were quickly able to arrive before the castle of Azeroth. Glancing left and right of the city, Kevin was flabbergasted as he said. Seriously, how can traveling inside of a demon city be so easy? They barely saw any demon patrolling the area. How was this place supposed to be one of the main demon cities? The lack of surveillance made him speechless. Hearing Kevin's comment and glancing at him, a faint smile appeared on my lips. It really isn't, the only reason it is like this is because I made it this way. What? As I hadn't explained to Kevin my plan, it was naturally understandable that he had no idea of what happened. But in short, because Azeroth had taken a lot of demons with him, we were, fortunately, able to arrive at the castle quickly despite the fact that Silig's figure was fairly noticeable. Since there were fewer demons, it was naturally much easier to move around. Moreover, with everyone being distracted by the conflict that was happening not so far from Seton, it was only natural that the security was lax. Here. Halting my steps a couple of meters away from the castle, glancing at Kevin and Silig, I fell into deep thought. So far everything was going as I had envisioned. Omgolung took the bait and moved towards Seton, and following that Azeroth had no choice but to move as well, pretty much leaving behind the castle with only a few demons patrolling it. The build-up to that part also went as I had envisioned, as I was able to pin all of the blame towards the demons giving rise to this situation. Everything so far was how I had envisioned it prior to coming to Amora. The pieces that I had set up had finally started to move according to how I dictated, and now, it was time to end the game. Glancing at Kevin and Silig, who were respectively on my left and right side, I pointed towards the castle and said, "That is going to be our next destination." Chapter 179, The Castle of Azeroth, 1. Staring at Kevin, who was busy controlling his drone in the air, I impatiently asked, "You got something?" Staring at his watch as he monitored the drone in the sky, Kevin shook his head. "Nothing yet." It's been about a couple of hours since Kevin, Silig, and I were waiting outside of the perimeter of the castle. As Kevin was able to enter the castle through the use of a skill that he had acquired a couple of months prior back in the novel, for obvious reasons, I couldn't replicate the same method he had used to enter the castle. If only there was only a secret passage. Sigh. Sighing inwardly, I knew that lamenting at my past decisions was stupid, as my past self would have never been able to know that I was going to enter my own novel. But I still did it anyway, as I needed someone to vent my frustrations against. In the end, as I didn't know of any secret passage that led to the inside of the castle, we could only scout the castle using Kevin's drone to get a better idea of how to sneak in. Interlocking my arms together as I stretched my body, I asked, "How much more time do you need?" Staring at his watch intently, Kevin shook his head. "I'm not sure, because I don't want to get caught. I'm currently operating the drone at an altitude of 4 kilometers, it's hard to get a proper read from that height." Surprised by the information, I asked, 4 kilometers?
Yeah.
Since we aren't sure on who is in the castle, the safest height to surveil would be that. I see. Kevin's words weren't without merit. Although Marquis Azeroth wasn't present in the castle, as we still weren't fully aware of who was inside, it was never wrong to take extra precautions. Moreover, since demons could fly, the chances of the drone getting discovered weren't low despite the fact that it had a cloaking system. Thus, such a high altitude made sense. Plus, with how advanced technology was, that height still didn't impede the drone from scanning the castle below. All right, I think I got a general idea of the layout of the castle. After another 10 minutes of surveying the castle, nodding his head, Kevin tapped on his watch as a 3-dimensional model of the castle appeared before him. Good. KHHR. Taken aback, Silic, who was standing next to Kevin, showed a surprised look on his face as he looked at the holographic image that appeared before Kevin. Pointing towards the castle, he curiously asked as his deep voice resounded across the area. "What is that?" Turning towards Silic, speaking in Latrevian, Kevin responded. "It's called a hologram and one of the castles before us." Confused, Silic repeated. "Hologram?" Nodding his head, Kevin elaborated. "Hologram, yes, it's human technology and it helps us project an image of objects through the use of infrared sensors and dash." "Stop, you're confusing him." Staring at Kevin, who was about to delve into the topic of holographic technology, I rolled my eyes as I pointed at Silic, who seemed to be even more confused than before. "Project? Infrared? Sensors?" Staring at Silic, Kevin rubbed his nose in embarrassment as he apologized. "Sorry, I got too into it." He got too caught up and almost rambled about his hobby. Knowing that Kevin was a tech junkie, I didn't think too much of his behavior and switched the topic. "It doesn't matter, forget about that. Have you found something?" Turning his attention back to the holographic image displayed on his watch, Kevin pointed towards a certain section of the castle.
Yeah.
"Take a look at this." Heeding Kevin's words, leaning in, I looked in the direction of where he was pointing at. "Check this out, although it looks like there are only 3 entrances of the castles, if you look at the map close enough you can see that there is another one not so far from the Easter Gate." Frowning as I squinted my eyes to get a better look at the holographic image of the castle before me, after a minute, not seeing it, I glanced at Kevin and asked him to point it out for me. "Where?" "Here." "Oh, I see it." Pinching the holographic image and moving it to the right, Kevin pointed towards a certain section of the castle where a small wooden door appeared. Because of how grand the castle was relative to the door, if not for the fact that Kevin pointed it out for me, I would have never been able to see it. Though I do find the fact that there was such a place odd, in the end, I didn't dwell too deeply into it. If there really was something off about that place, with the red book in my hand, I didn't have to worry about our safety too much. Seeing that I noticed the door, Kevin continued. "From the looks of it, this seems to be the exit that the servants of the castle used to dispose the trash and unnecessary items. Although I wasn't able to figure out how many guards are present in that place, from the looks of it there are no more than 2 guards. But it doesn't really matter, as what we should truly care about is their strength." Nodding my head, I glanced at Kevin and asked. "So are you suggesting we sneak from there?"
Yeah.
After thinking for a couple of seconds, nodding my head, I agreed. "That sounds reasonable. When should we go?" Placing his hand on his chin as he pondered for a moment, Kevin glanced at the castle before him for a couple of seconds before saying, Now that I've figured out about that area, I'll try to get even more info on it so that we can create a more appropriate plan, so maybe a day?" Taken aback, my brows knit tightly. A day? Wasn't that a bit too long? Seeing the doubt on my face, Kevin elaborated.
Yeah.
The more thorough we are, the less the chances of something bad happening. Checking my watch and seeing the time, my face crumped up a little. That's a bit too long. If we spend a day surveilling the castle, we'll only have 8 hours before we are forced to go back to Earth. Glancing at me from the corner of his eyes, Kevin nodded his head.
Yeah.
I know, but since you said that the castle is the last place we need to go, I don't think we'll need to spend more than 8 hours there. Pausing for a second and fully looking at me, Kevin continued. Unless you think we need more time, and if so, I can just do a short skimming and we can go in a couple of hours, but the chances of something going wrong might be higher. Given that they weren't going to stay there for long, Kevin estimated that 8 hours should have been enough. Since Ren said that they were only going there to collect a few things, staying there more than 8 hours wouldn't really be the best idea, since each passing second they spent there could lead to situations where they could get spotted. Listening to Kevin speak, with my brows knit even tighter, after a while, my brows eventually loosened as I shook my head. No, you're right, do your thing. After thinking about it for a while, I knew that Kevin was right. Although 8 hours was indeed enough time to accomplish everything, considering the fact that we were going to be moving slowly and carefully around the enormous castle, there was a small chance that it might not be enough time, given that something could happen during the time. However, after weighing the ups and downs, I decided to go along with Kevin's decision. So what if we ended up wasting a day? As long as we could reduce the chances of getting caught whilst infiltrating the castle, I was all in for it. Haste made waste. Thinking thus far, resolutely looking at Kevin, I nodded my head. All right, take your time and get a proper read on the situation. How long? Shh. Placing his finger on his lips, Kevin looked towards the distance. Towards a certain part of the castle. Soon. Just as planned, Kevin spent a whole day scanning the perimeter of the castle as he got a proper read on the situation. After restlessly analyzing the situation through looking at the times in which the door was used and who was guarding it and who was leaving it, Kevin was able to come up with an appropriate plan on how to infiltrate the castle, which he naturally shared with me. And well, once I heard of his plan, I couldn't help but scratch my head in confusion. The reason why I was confused wasn't because of how complicated the plan was, no, it was the exact opposite. The plan was simple. Too simple. It was so simple yet so efficient that I was left speechless for a long time. Not long after Kevin spoke, snapping me out of my thoughts, the door opened, revealing the features of 2 orcs. Each around rank. After them, another orc carrying a trolley filled with trash soon appeared as he moved out of the castle and headed towards the direction of where Kevin and I were hiding in. Good, everything is going as planned. Seeing the orc heading our way, sighing in relief, Kevin glanced at Silig, who was standing next to him, and said, Silig, your turn. KHHRRR, yes. Nodding his head, Silig's deep green eyes remained fixed on the orc that was slowly approaching him. In terms of size, the orc was a bit smaller than Silig, however, aside from that, he resembled him a bit as his skin pigmentation was a shade of light green, almost white. Although they could easily be told apart if they stood next to each, as Silig had a massive scar running across half of his face. If it was only for a short moment, others might actually not notice that they were in fact different orcs. Which was something we were aiming for. Not long after, taking a step forward, as soon as the orc was close to Silig, quickly dashing in his direction and grabbing him by the neck, Silig clenched his arm as the muffled sound of bones breaking resounded across the space. Throwing the orc into the trolley, taking the trolley, Silig turned around and made his way back towards the entrance. At the entrance of the door, 2 orcs quietly stood with their weapons by the side. They both wore thin metallic armors that only covered part of their bodies. Hearing the sound of the trolley headed their way, staring at Silig's figure heading their way, the guards stood still as one of the guards asked, "You're back already?" "Yes." "That was Foz, huh? Who are Y-?" Arriving before them and stopping them mid-sentence, before noticing that something was wrong, two large hands grabbed both of them by the neck as once again the muffled sound of bones breaking resounded across the area. Not even a minute after he incapacitated the previous orc, Silig took out the two guards. Almost as if he's swatting a bunch of flies. Scary. Extremely scary. Staring at Silig, who had just incapacitated the two guards, smiling, Kevin looked at me and said, "Come on, Ren, let's go."
Yeah.
Sure. Looking at Kevin for a couple of seconds, I couldn't help but scratch my head. I was not used to this. I was not used to sneaking into places through pure brute strength without going through elaborate schemes and preparations. Felt sort of weird and refreshing at the same time. Was it just me? I think I might be going crazy. Chapter 180, The Castle of Azeroth, 2. Entering the castle, we soon found ourselves inside of a long and narrow corridor in which a red carpet dyed the floor. Clank! Closing the door behind him, Kevin glanced at the bodies of the orcs that Silig had just taken out. With one body inside of the trolley and two leaning against the wall of the hallway, it was safe to say that they were not going to wake up anytime soon. All right, if everything goes according to what I've observed, there shouldn't be another turn shift for the next 12 hours, which is within our 8-hour limit. Pausing for a second and staring at Silig and then the orcs on the ground, Kevin sighed in relief as he continued. Fortunately, he held back and didn't kill the guards, else the situation would have turned troublesome. Although Silig had broken their necks, because of the orcs' strong constitutions, they were still alive. Albeit barely. Had Silig killed the orcs, then things would have become troublesome as they would have immediately alerted the demons of their presence. The reason being was because each of the orcs had signed a contract with a demon. If their contractee suddenly died, they would be the first ones to know as their souls would be damaged. Looking at me, Kevin started speaking. "Ren, now that we've entered the castle, we should still not let our guard down, as I'm not sure about how many enemies are hiding in the building." MHM. Listening to Kevin speak, I absent-mindedly nodded my head. Although I was aware of what Kevin was saying, my mind was currently preoccupied with something else. Staring at the door behind me for a couple of seconds, I couldn't help but think to myself, something doesn't add up. I feel like there was something missing. Something that Kevin and I forgot to take into consideration when entering through that door. I mean, if you think about it, there was no way that a huge castle with 3 enormous gates would have this small back door, which was much easier to sneak through. Yes, although it was indeed protected by 2 ranked orcs that were under the contracts of the demons, I highly doubted that this was all of the security they had. There must be something else at play. Frowning hard, recalling something, I quickly took out the red book and quickly skimmed through it to get a better idea of the situation. Ah, I see now. A couple of seconds after flipping through the book and skimming through the last page, I finally understood why the security was lax here. And what I found out instantly cleared all the doubts I had in my mind. Prison. What lay before us was a massive prison that trapped orcs and demons inside. The reason why the security was so lax was because there was another layer that we had to go through before truly reaching the insides of the castle. Now this was troublesome. It already took us a long time to sneak into the building, yet we were now presented with another annoying situation? Just what in the world? Massaging my forehead, I sighed as I mumbled. Talk about problematic. Hearing my mumble, turning around, Kevin asked, "What's wrong?" Glancing at Kevin, I lazily waved my hand. "Ah, nothing, it's just that I've figured out where we are." "Where we are?" Staring towards the end of the corridor, I slowly said.
Yeah.
We are at the entrance that leads to the prison. Hearing my answer, taken aback for a short moment and realizing why I was acting the way I was, an extended sigh escaped from Kevin's mouth. Ah, no wonder it was so easy to get in. Does that mean that we have to think of another plan? No, not particularly. Although there were indeed demons guarding the prison, according to what I read from the book, the situation wasn't that bad. Although troublesome, it wasn't impossible. 5 ranked demons, which was well within the scope of acceptable. Especially since we had Silic with us. Normally there would have been at least an ranked demon, however, given that the demons were at war with the orcs not so far from here, the only ones remaining here were the ranked ones. Thinking along those lines, a smile appeared on my face. I guess all the preparations for this moment weren't for naught. I was finally reaping the fruits of my labor. All right, let's go. Glancing at the long corridor, I urged Kevin and Silic to follow along. Is this the prison?
Yeah.
Walking past the corridor, we were able to quickly arrive at the entrance of the prison. As I had already checked beforehand, there was no one guarding the area we were currently in. From what I've gathered from the book, all of the demons were waiting on the other side of the prison. Directly in the area that led towards the inwards of the castle. Go in.
Yeah.
As we entered the prison, the first thing I noticed was how cold and humid the atmosphere of the place was. It was as though I was in the middle of winter with how cold it was as I felt my cheeks instantly puff up as a red tinge appeared on them. To make matters worse, the air inside of the prison tasted like stale bread and centuries-old stale water, extremely rancid. The walls were bare, with faint scuff marks marking the gray stone of the prison walls. The cells barred with metal bars appeared everywhere as orcs and demons could be seen kneeling down with their bodies bound by thick chains. KHHH. Woo.
Ah.
Groans and weeps of despair continuously echoed across the space. Passing past the prison's cells, glancing towards the orcs imprisoned, noticing something, Kevin asked. What's wrong with the orcs over there? Pointing towards one of the orcs in the cells, Kevin said. Look at the orcs over there, they have black veins tracing all over their body. Looking in the direction of where Kevin was looking, I soon noticed the black veins that Kevin was talking about. Instantly realizing what they were, I explained. Ah, they are orcs that have been forcefully made to sign a contract with a demon. From what I remembered writing, the black veins were a result of when someone was forced to sign a contract. Because the other party didn't agree to submit to the demon, as they were forcefully made to sign a contract with them, they were put under a curse that subjected them to intense pains. If they didn't agree to submit by a given period of time, they would be left to rot in jail under the curse. Ruthless. Closing my eyes, I double-checked with Angelica. I'm not wrong, right? If both sides don't agree to the contract, the weaker party will suffer a measurable backlash that is equivalent to being punctured by millions of needles. That painful? What do you expect, human? The contract binds the two contractors' souls, of course, it is going to hurt. I guess that makes sense. Since the contract involved the binding of both souls, the weaker party would obviously suffer more if they were resisting. And once the contract was signed and they were bound by it, if the other party refused, they would be put under the curse. Nodding his head in understanding, after a bit of thought, Kevin asked. If they are under contract, why leave them in prison? Hearing Kevin's question and snapping me out of my thoughts, placing my hand on my chin, I mused for a second. I'm not too sure, but I think it's because they are resisting the contract. Unless they agree, they would most likely stay in their current state. Understanding somewhat, glancing at the prison, Kevin asked. So what do you plan next? Pausing for a second and glancing at Silic, who was standing next to me, Kevin asked. Should we just make Silic brute force his way through like before? Shaking my head, I smiled. No, there's a much easier way actually. Easier? With my smile deepening, glancing towards the cells before us, I extended my arms and said,
Yeah.
We just set free a couple of prisoners. Eh? Taken aback, barely any words escaped from Kevin's mouth as he somewhat understood what Ren wanted to do. Was he trying to create chaos and then use the chance to escape? Wouldn't that attract a lot of attention? Seeing that Kevin had understood, I nodded my head. Yup, just like you're thinking, I'm planning on causing a commotion and force the demons to come into the prison and settle it down. Using the distraction as a chance we can directly enter the castle and do what we were planning on doing. Pausing as I clapped my hands together, I said, Easy peasy. Massaging his forehead, Kevin nodded his head. Ah, alright, I guess that works too, though I still think having Silic kill the guards silently is the best method. Nodding my head, I scratched my nose as I vaguely said, You're not wrong, but let's just say this method is the most ideal for me. What? Seeing Kevin's confusion, I just smiled and didn't elaborate. What Kevin said was true. Having Silic brute force his way through wasn't a bad idea, however, as I glanced at the prison before me, an idea irrelevant to the current situation had come into mind. Rather, the idea stacked up with another one of my ideas that I had thought of before, helping me resolve a few of the problems I was having. Thinking along those lines, a faint smile appeared on my lips as I thought to myself, I guess the prison still had its uses. Staring at the prisoners trapped in their cells, pointing towards the thick chains binding them, Kevin asked, Hey, Ren, if we're freeing them, what are we going to do about the chains? The chains?
Yeah.
They seem really hard to break. At least not without making enough of a commotion. Pausing for a second, and understanding what he wanted to say, I waved it off as I casually said, Ah, don't worry about them, they are special chains made to block any aura flow. Therefore, they are actually quite easy to break. Especially if you are using mana. These were the same type of chains that trapped Silic back in Good Kodrer. They were specifically crafted chains that stopped all aura flow, turning the orcs into powerless individuals. However, it had to be noted that the chains only worked for orcs, as mana could easily break through them. This was also why I was able to free Silic so easily. Nodding his head in understanding, glancing at the numerous cells before him, he asked, Who should we free? Everyone? Shaking my head, I responded, No, let's just go with the strongest. Confused, Kevin asked, Who? Smiling, I pointed towards two cells in the distance where two orcs could be seen keeling down on the ground. Those two over there. Both of the orcs had their head held down, with one having long silver hair covering his face whilst the other having a thin red mohawk tracing down half of his head. The frames of the two orcs were huge, as their muscles, which were the size of 2 footballs, had green veins popping out from them, making them look extremely intimidating. Although I couldn't tell their strength because of the chains binding them and blocking their aura flow, judging from the fact that their chains were the thickest out of all the prisoners, I knew that they were the strongest. Although they weren't as strong as Silic, they were still quite strong. Staring at the two orcs in the distance with a smile on my face, recalling something, and turning my attention back to Kevin, I asked, By the way, Kevin, can you take out 2 healing potions? Raising his brow, Kevin was confused. Healing potions, for what? Healing them? Shouldn't you have them? Raising my arm, my eyebrows twitched as I tried to wave it in his direction. You think? Right. Although a lot of time passed since I lost my arm, I still couldn't fully use my arm, as I would get continuous currents of electricity running through it. If I bore through the pain, I could probably use my arm like normal, but honestly, wasn't too fond of pain, so I refrained from using my arm unless necessary. Naturally, I had used a lot of potions to heal my arm, hence why Kevin somewhat believed my statement of me no longer having any potions available. Which by the way was a lie. I actually still had quite a few potions with me. The reason why I asked Kevin for the potions was because regular potions didn't work on orcs. With them unable to ingest mana, regular potions couldn't work on them, pretty much rendering them useless to the orcs. However, there was a solution to this problem, and his name was Kevin Voss. With the system shop available to him, although expensive, Kevin could easily be able to purchase potions that worked on orcs. Plus, with Kevin being relatively smart, he understood that I was merely using the arm as an excuse. He knew that I knew something about the system, but he only thought that I only knew just a small fraction of what the system could do. So he didn't really care and just complied, which I liked. Extending his hand forward, materializing before Kevin were 2 green transparent potions. Admiring the potions in his hands for a couple of seconds, Kevin tossed one of them to me. Here. Thanks. Catching the potion, I thanked him. Holding the potion with my left hand, staring at the 2 orcs I had set my sights on, smiling towards Kevin, I said, "All right, everything is set, let's free some orcs, shall we?" Chapter 181, The Castle of Azeroth, 3. With everything prepared, glancing at Silic who was standing next to me, I pointed towards the entrance of the prison and said, "Silic, you wait near the entrance of the prison." This was a must. The reason I asked him to do this was self-explanatory. Once the commotion started, Kevin, Silic, and I would immediately move towards the entrance of the prison. With Silic's enormous frame, there was a high chance he could get spotted, therefore it was better for him to just wait near the entrance so that the chances of us getting caught were lower. After all, it was very hard for Silic to run without causing too much of a commotion. KHRR, yes. Unaware of my thoughts, Silic nodded his head and glanced towards the direction I pointed. Right, before you go here. Just as Silic had taken a couple of steps towards the prison entrance, recalling something, I took out a large gray fabric from my dimensional space and quickly threw it at him, who caught it with his large hands. Put it on. After I threw the fabric at Silic, turning towards Kevin, I took out a small thin circular white object thing and threw it at him. You on the other hand put that. Confused, Kevin caught the item that I threw at him and took a good look at it. What's this? A mask? Nodding my head, taking out a similar mask, I put it on my face. Just a precaution. Yes, a precaution. Unlike the cheap mask that I had used back in the black market, this mask didn't come off as easily and it molded perfectly with the face of the person wearing it, preventing anyone from seeing the wearer's identity. Although I wasn't sure whether demons had things like cameras, I knew that they definitely had some sort of means to be able to look at what had happened during a specific period of time. Therefore, for safety precautions, it was best if everyone hide their faces. Just so that it wouldn't come back and haunt us in the future. Although I may be acting paranoid, this was a necessary precaution. Power Law 29, plan all the way to the end. I couldn't allow for any liability to affect my plans. If there was a possibility of something happening, I would thoroughly make preparations for it. Plus, if I thought about it carefully, I was essentially coming here to rob the place. What kind of robber comes to rob a place without wearing a mask? Only amateurs would do that. Makes sense. Thinking for a bit, Kevin nodded his head in agreement and put on the mask I had given him. Subsequently, as if the mask was alive, it slowly wiggled around his face and distorted his features. He looked a lot uglier now. Seeing Kevin put on the mask, turning towards Silic, I stalked my chin and proceeded to nod my head in satisfaction. Not bad. Wearing a large gray hood, Silic's facial features were completely hidden. Although his frame still gave away the fact that he was an orc, this was fine. The reason why he was wearing a hood and not a mask was rather simple. The mask was made for humans, not orcs, so it just wouldn't fit him. Either way, as long as they didn't catch wind of his face, it wouldn't affect the plans that I had for him. I had big plans for him, so I couldn't let anyone catch wind of his identity. I couldn't afford to lose an important piece at the beginning of the match. At least not a piece that would play a crucial part in the grand scheme of things for the future I had envisioned. All right, this should be enough. After making sure that everyone's features were hidden, I saw Siligoth and glanced towards the 2 cells in the distance where the orcs were imprisoned. Pointing towards the cell where the orc with long hair was imprisoned, I looked at Kevin and said, "Kevin, you take the other one and I'll take this one." Nodding his head, Kevin looked at the other orc, the one with the mohawk, and asked, "Him right?" "Yes." "Okay." Coming to an agreement, Kevin and I quickly moved towards the cells of the 2 orcs. Moments after, stopping before the prison cells, without hesitation, Kevin and I easily broke the metal bars of the cells and arrived before the orcs who were bound by the large metal chains. Glancing at Kevin who was in the cell opposite to me, I quietly whispered, "You ready?"
Yeah.
Glancing at me and nodding his head, unsheathing his sword, Kevin closed his eyes as a red hue enveloped his sword. A second after, as the red hue shrouding his sword reached a certain level, Kevin proceeded to hack at the large metal chains binding the orc. A muffled sound of the chains hitting the side of the walls echoed across the prison as Kevin's sword directly cut into the chains. Fortunately, as Kevin was alert, the chains didn't produce that much sound as they hit the sides of the wall. After Kevin broke through the first chain, he proceeded to cut the next one, and after a couple of minutes, Kevin managed to break all of the chains binding the orc. Freed from the chains, the orc's frail body weakly fell towards the ground, creating a small thud which fortunately was dampened thanks to Kevin reacting in time and cushioning his fall. Sighing in relief as he helped the orc sit upright, glancing towards my direction, Kevin looked at me and whispered, "I'm done." Same. Similar to Kevin, coating my sword with mana, I slowly cut the chains that were binding the orc before me. In a matter of minutes, all of the chains were broken. After breaking all of the chains, taking out the potion Kevin had given me moments prior, I glanced at Kevin and pointed towards the potion. "Give him the potions." Opening the lid of the potion, I propped the orc's head up and tried to feed him the potion. "Yes." Similarly, taking the potion out, nodding his head, Kevin propped up the head of the orc he was with and fed him the potion. Seeing Kevin feed the orc the potion from the corner of my eyes, a small frown appeared on my face as I tried to feed the potion to the orc before me. "Here, drink this." Still in a daze and unaware of what was happening, the orc's hazy eyes looked towards the potion that was near its mouth. Perhaps because he was still out of it, despite my many attempts at feeding him the potion, the orc refused to drink the potion. I apologize in advance. Annoyed, after a couple of seconds and seeing that the orc was too out of it to drink the potion, grabbing him by the hair, I forcefully shoved the potion in his mouth as a small gagging sound escaped from his mouth. Guck. Should have done this before, couldn't afford to waste time. Although the demons weren't patrolling the prison, that didn't mean that they wouldn't occasionally come to check. The less time I wasted, the better the situation was for us. Qua. After I made sure the orc drank the whole potion, putting the empty bottle back in my dimensional space, I looked at the orc before me whose body was rapidly healing. Good. Glancing at Kevin and seeing that he was similarly done, I nodded my head in his direction as he nodded back. Everything was proceeding smoothly. Right, almost forgot. After feeding the orc the potion and just as I was about to leave, recalling something, I made my way towards the chains. Using my hands, I made sure to crush them with my hands, in a way that it looked as though someone had directly broken the chains through brute force. I needed to cover my traces. Although they would definitely find the whole situation bizarre as 2 orcs directly broke free at the same time, it was better to make them think that the chains had malfunctioned rather than think that it was someone's doing. Even though the demons will later find out that someone infiltrated the mansion, I would rather them not know that it was through the prison, as I still had a use for it. Glancing at Kevin, who was similarly trying to hide his traces by breaking the chains, I pointed towards the entrance and whispered, "You done?" Taking his hands off of the chains, Kevin nodded his head.
Yeah.
Good, all right, let's go. After making sure we left no traces of our presence, Kevin and I directly left and joined Silic at the entrance of the prison. Wapa dash. A minute after Kevin and I freed the orcs, an enraged roar resounded across the prison as two overbearing auras that looked be around to enshrouded the prison. What's going on? Huh? We've been breached. Feeling the enormous pressures emanating from the insides of the prison, the guards waiting at the entrance of the prison were startled. Instantly and without hesitation they all rushed towards the source of the commotion. Because of how powerful the auras were, no one stayed behind as they instantly understood that the situation was serious. The opponent was not something that just a few of them could face. They had to be together or else they would without a doubt die. Of course, as they moved they also called for reinforcement. However, at the moment with only 5 guards present, they all had to be present at the scene, or else only death would await them. This was exactly what I was aiming for when I freed the orcs. Thus, seeing that all of the guards had left, glancing at Silic and Kevin, I smiled and dashed towards the door that lead towards the innards of the castle. All right, let's go. I was now one step closer to my goal. Clank! Opening the door that lead to the outside of the prison, the first thing I saw was a majestic hall with paintings all over the walls and bright chandeliers hanging from the ceiling of the hall. Staring at the hall before me, I couldn't help but be reminded of a luxurious mansion owned by the nobles back in ancient times. Unfortunately, because I didn't have much time, I could only admire the scenery before me for a couple of seconds. Looking towards my left and right, I tried to make sure there was no one present. After seeing no demons present, turning around, and looking at Kevin and Silic, I pointed towards a set of stairs in the distance and said, "Kevin, you and Silic go downstairs towards the bottom floor." "What about you?" Pausing for a second as I stared deeply into Kevin's eyes, I softly said, "I have to go to another place." Frowning, Kevin asked, "Then I should come with you?" Glancing at Silic, who was standing behind Kevin, I shook my head. "I wouldn't have minded normally, but he's with you." Ah. Also realizing the problem, Kevin understood. It was Silic again. With him with us, moving and sneaking around the castle was not ideal. Therefore, it was best if the 3 of us split up so that I could accomplish my mission faster. Thus, thinking along those lines and looking at Kevin, I apologetically said,
Yeah.
"Someone needs to make sure he isn't spotted. Although he is strong, what's the point of infiltrating this place if we're going to get caught immediately?" Hearing my explanation, Kevin rolled his eyes. "So in short, you want me to babysit him?" Freezing for a second, processing what he said, a bitter smile appeared on my face as I nodded my head. "In a way, yes, but it's not like I'm telling you to go downstairs for nothing. At the bottom floor there should be the treasury, and what I want you to do is scout the perimeter and tell me who is there so that when I come back we can come up with an appropriate plan." Although Silic's frame can be annoying, his strength should make up for it. It was true. Although Silic was not the best person to have when trying to sneak around, he was strong in his own right. Heck, he could very well be the strongest person in the castle present. If not for me being unsure about whether this statement was true or not, I would have just bulldozed my way in. That does make sense. Hearing my explanation, Kevin proceeded to nod his head. In a way, although Silic's frame would stop them from sneaking in, he made up for it with his strength. If push comes to shove, he could very well just kill anyone that blocked his path, ensuring Kevin's safety. Seeing that I had somehow convinced Kevin, turning around, I quickly made my way towards the stairs in the distance. All right, I'm going now. Sure, meet up with us after you're done with your thing. Yup. Turning my head away from Kevin, glancing at the stairs in the distance, a faint smile appeared on my lips. It was about time I reaped the rewards of this trip. Chapter 182, The Castle of Azeroth, 4. After separating from Silic and Kevin, glancing at the ring on my finger, I softly said, "All right, Angelica, you can come out now." Following my voice, black smoke rose from my left finger and Angelica's figure slowly materialized before me. Opening her eyes, Angelica glanced at me and softly said, "I'm ready." Smiling, out of nowhere, I threw an orb-like object in her direction. "Here." Plaque. Huh? What's this? Catching the orb with her hand, Angelica tilted her head in confusion as she observed the black orb in her hand. "It's your core." Noticing Angelica's confusion, I smiled. Taking a couple of seconds to process the object in her hand, opening her eyes wide and looking at me, Angelica's voice raised a few pitches. Seeing Angelica's reaction, raising my brow, I teased. "What? You don't want it? If you don't want it, I'll gladly take it back." No, I'll take it." Shaking her head, Angelica quickly placed the orb in her chest. Shortly after, as if made out of water, the orb directly melted into Angelica's body. As the core melted into her body, a terrifying red hue enshrouded her body, giving her regal and majestic presence. After a couple of seconds, slowly opening her eyes and turning her attention back to me, with a skeptical look on her face, Angelica asked, "Why are you giving it to me?" Thoughtfully placing my hand on my chin, I shortly replied, "MHH, let's just say that I'm trusting you." Taken aback by my answer, Angelica didn't know how to answer. Being a demon and coming from a place where everyone would screw you over at the simplest mistake, the word trust was not something Angelica was very familiar with. There was no such thing as trust amongst demons, and so Angelica was naturally unaware of how it felt to be trusted by someone. Yet that all changed today. For the first time in her life, someone had said that they trusted her. Moreover, it was the same human that had enslaved her and made her work for him for 5 years. It was weird and made Angelica feel odd. Although she wasn't sure how she was feeling right now, deep down, just a little part of her felt grateful. Turning her head away from me, Angelica softly muttered, "I see." Seeing her reaction, unaware of what she was thinking, I kept a simple smile on my face. Everything was a lie. Of course, that wasn't the truth. But she didn't need to know that. Taking out the orb wasn't actually that hard. All I needed to do was channel my mana towards where the orb was located, and I was able to quickly pull it out. Moreover, since we've signed the mana contract, it didn't matter if I gave her the core back or not, lest she completed the 5-year deal with me, she was still bound to me. I could have already given the core to her back when we signed the contract, but I refrained from doing so. The reason was simple. I was waiting for a moment like this to happen. For the perfect chance to appeal to her and make it seem like I trusted her. On the outside, it looked as though I was trusting her and making her feel important, but in reality, I was merely trying to appeal to her so that she would let her guard down against me. Power Law 43, work on the hearts and minds of others. Just like Silic, if I wanted her to wholeheartedly follow me, I had to appeal to her desires. In this case, the core. By adding some flowery words, I made her feel special, increasing her favorability towards me. Though I sounded manipulative and perhaps borderline psychopathic, I didn't really care. I needed to do what needed to be done. If I wanted her to fully become my piece, this was the necessary step. Like I said before, I was no hero. Sometimes, for the sake of the future, I had to do things that I would have never done before. After all, what was the point of being a saint if it only led to a future where the Demon King swallowed the world? If the world wanted a hero, they had Kevin. If they desired a hero off of me, I'm sorry, but I couldn't grant them that wish. Sometimes, someone had to get their hands dirty for the sake of the greater good. Suddenly, snapping me out of my thoughts, out of nowhere a muffled explosion rang in the distance, shaking the whole castle slightly. Glancing towards the direction of where the explosion was coming from, squinting my eyes, I instantly understood what had happened. It seems like the aftershock of the battle is reaching all the way here. I guess Angelica revealing herself once again has caused the orc chief to attack even more fiercely. He probably took it as a provocation and hence why the aftershock of the attack reached all of the way here. That was good though. The fiercer he was, the laxer this place was. By distracting the demons inside of the castle and redirecting their attention towards the fight, it would in turn allow for Angelica and I to have an easier time when moving towards our destination. Thinking along those lines, glancing at Angelica, I said, "We should go." "Yes." Halting my steps and glancing at Angelica, I said, "Angelica, walk before me." The reason I asked Angelica to walk before me was self-explanatory. She was a demon, hence she could pretty much move around the castle without arousing too much suspicion. Moreover, given the current situation of the castle both externally and internally, it was safe to assume that no one would particularly pay too much close attention to us. So just having Angelica prove that she was a demon was enough to somewhat move around the castle without much trouble. Still, although Angelica being a demon helped somewhat, that didn't mean we were just brazenly moving around the castle with no care of the world. No. We still needed to be careful when moving around. If someone stopped us and questioned us, without a doubt we would get caught. Gulp. Therefore, as an extra safety precaution, I took out a gigantification potion and quickly downed it. This will be hella annoying. Feeling my body expand and become larger, I quickly changed my clothes to the ones of the orc that I had met at the entrance at the back of the castle and wore them. Although I couldn't change my skin pigmentation, it didn't really matter. Placing my fingers on my face, or more specifically the mask I was wearing, I tried my best to distort my features to look more like that of an orc. After a couple of seconds of molding, glancing at Angelica, I asked, "This should be enough, do I look like an orc?" Briefly looking at me, Angelica shook her head. "Not really. Not even a little bit. Only if you look from far. That's good enough for me." In the first place, this was merely a precaution I took in order to reduce the chances of getting caught. I wasn't actually planning on fully copying an orc, as that would take too many resources and there would be too many loops in my plans, as I did not sign a contract with a demon. Thus, as long as I looked at the part from far, it was good enough. Glancing at Angelica, I quickly urged her to move forward. "All right, let's go." Irritated, Angelica responded, "Don't rush me, human." Yeah, I guess you don't really care about reaching the Viscount rank." "Viscount rank?"
Yeah.
"The place we're going to has the item that you're looking for." Hearing my response as her eyes lit up, Angelica quickly moved forwards. "Let's go." Seeing Angelica's reaction, I shook my head as a smile appeared on my lips. What a child. The layout of the castle was rather simple. There were 4 floors, with the bottom floor being the place where Kevin and Silic went. The place where the treasury was located. Other than that, there was the 2nd and 3rd floor, but honestly, there was nothing important there, as only the 1st and 4th floor were important, as they were places I wanted to go to. Currently, Angelica and I were on the 1st floor of the castle, and our goal was to reach the 4th floor. The highest and most secured area of the castle. That's where our goal was. Let's go. As we moved around the castle, fortunately, given the fact that Angelica's strength was pretty strong and that we were walking rather inconspicuously, no one questioned nor stopped us as we walked through the castle. Moreover, the fact that there was a war happening not so far from here added with the fact that the prison area was currently in chaos, the castle security was even laxer than before. Thinking along those lines, I secretly gave a pat on my back. All that planning wasn't for nothing. Infiltrating such an important place had never felt as easy as now. Even Kevin back in the original novel had a much harder time than I was having. Thus with Angelica next to me, we passed by numerous different rooms, from the dining hall, the kitchen, the armory, the magic item storage, the alchemy lab, the prison, and the kennel. Had I not been in a rush for time, I would have without a doubt spent the time admiring the place. Unfortunately, since we only had about 7 hours at our disposal, I could only ignore the scenery around me and increase my pace. Finally, after carefully walking around the castle with Angelica, we were able to reach the final destination. Marquis Azeroth's private space. Staring at the large black door before us, Angelica curiously asked, "How do we enter the place?" Glancing at Angelica, I bluntly said, "Easy, just open the door and enter." Rolling her eyes, Angelica focused her attention on the black door. "Stop joking, isn't there going to be some sort of security measure that will prevent anyone from sneaking in?" Given how important the place was, there was no way just opening the door was enough. Thus, glancing left and right, Angelica tried to see what she could do to help. She really wanted to reach Viscount rank. Seeing Angelica dismiss what I said, I was a little offended. I really wasn't joking when I said that, you know. Entering Marquis Azeroth's personal space wasn't actually that hard. Arriving before the door, putting my hand on the doorknob, I pulled back and the door slowly opened. Silence swept the surroundings as Angelica was left standing speechless. "That's it?" Smugly looking at Angelica, I nodded my head.
Yeah.
"What do you expect?" In the first place, Marquis Azeroth rarely left his castle. Added with the fact that orcs are terrible at sneaking in and that all of the demons present were under his control, entering his private quarters wasn't really that hard. Moreover, the guards that were supposed to be guarding the room were taken by him to fight, resulting in even laxer security. Still, although entering was easy, it didn't mean that there were no safety precautions set in place by him. "Angelica, you wait here for a second." Telling Angelica to wait at the door, I quickly took a step into the room, and the first thing I saw was 2 translucent membranes that covered the front part of the room. These double membranes were specifically made to alert Marquis Azeroth of anyone who entered his office. Once someone trespassed those membranes, Marquis Azeroth would immediately be alerted of the trespassing. Honestly, the membrane was a very good way to block anyone from breaking in. However, there was just one problem, and that was that it only worked on demons and orcs. It did not take into consideration humans. Given that this world was only inhabited by demons and orcs, it was only common sense for Marquis Azeroth to set up safety precautions against the 2 races. Unfortunately, an outlier such as I was present. Thus, quickly bypassing the membrane, I entered the office. "Ah, I finally found you." Entering the office, halting my steps, and staring towards the corner of the room, a large smile appeared on my face. "Would you look at that?" The main ingredient used to cure the Mindbreaker curse was right before me.